Good morning, everyone. I'm Jed Garfield, and I'm here with my partner, Richard Pretzfelder. We run Leslie J. Garfield and Company, a boutique brokerage firm, primarily dealing in the sale of residential, institutional, and commercial townhouses throughout Manhattan and Brooklyn. And with us today is our friend and special guest, Craig Price. Craig is a partner at the firm of Belkin Burden, and he, like many of the other people we deal with in the business, make our jobs easier. And it's one of the reasons why we're speaking to him today, because when you need someone to get a job done, you need someone like Craig. That said, I'm going to turn it over to Rick, and Rick's going to sort of open up with some questions, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Craig, why don't you just just give a little background on yourself and your firm, and then we can jump into a little bit of commentary on what's going on in the market.
Absolutely. Thank you both, Jed and Rick, for having me this morning. I'm a partner at Belkin Burden Goldman. We're a real estate only law firm based in Midtown Manhattan. We strictly handle real estate related matters on multiple levels. I personally am a transactional attorney, which means that I help people buy, sell, finance, and lease both commercial and residential properties throughout the city and elsewhere. As well as we have a litigation department that handles principally real estate related litigation on the landlord tenant side. On the residential end of that equation, we represent strictly owners dealing with the process of either enforcing their rights under their leases, making sure they get their payments, as well as dealing with commercial related matters. We handle both sides, both owner and tenant. Again, principally enforcement of lease provisions and things of that nature. We also have an administrative real estate department, which is really a specialized department that handles something that I think we're going to talk about later today, this morning, which is rent stabilization, rent control guidelines. If it's a governmental agency and it has an acronym, that's what the administrative real estate department does. We also have a growing land use and zoning department. So we help people both in their planning and their development of properties, and also working with clients to figure out whether or not they can do development right transfers, or air rights transfers, as familiar as people sometimes call it. And we have a large co-op and condo department, lastly, which is basically where we represent about 350 buildings throughout the city on the day-to-day operations of their co-ops and condos. So as you can see, we pretty much have the real estate umbrella, an illegal real estate umbrella covered. With the exception of the fact that we do not do tax grievance work, but other than that, we're pretty self-encompassing.
So, Craig, what are you seeing in the market? Let's start there.
So I'm going to take it that through the COVID period, if we go back to March when this all started, the pipeline of real estate transactions was starting to pick up. The multifamily market was down year over year, as I'm sure a lot of people know. There's been changes in the laws. The activity and the volume was down. However, there were deals that were happening because people were getting familiar with what was going on in that marketplace, and pricing. Owners were coming to the realization that their buildings were slightly not as valuable as they previously were. Buyers were willing to take on some of that burden, and also come across and think that they could get cash flow positive properties and see some upside in the future, whenever the future might be. That pipeline was healthy going into COVID. During the beginning part of COVID, what we saw was that people started to think about whether or not they wanted to stay in those contracts, or whether there were price adjustments. So some of the contracts that we were in were renegotiated during that period. Others were terminated completely. Sometimes the seller got to retain a large portion of the deposit, and oftentimes, if there was crafty drafting in the contract, buyers were able to actually terminate the contract and receive full returns of their deposits. As we moved into April and May, the volume of those deals most of those pipeline deals were closing, or were pushed to later summer date closings, and the actual new transactional volume dipped significantly. And that was obviously the low, what I'll call the low of the market. as we've now moved towards early June and late June, and we've moved to phase two, what we've actually seen is an uptick of activity in the market. I think you could probably speak to this, both of you. There's been an uptick in listings of properties, as well as actual deals being consummated. I personally am working on a number of deals now that started just a few weeks ago. So I think that the market is now coming back slightly. I still believe that there will be a decline of overall year-to-year volume, but I think that we will see from first, second quarter into third and fourth an incline.
And just in terms of, Craig, I'm just interested, just in terms of deals that are on your desk or deal sheets that are coming across your desk, is there a significant change in pricing? Is it 2%, 5%? Is it non-existent? What sort of things have buyers been asking for, and have sellers been willing to concede?
So that's a very good question. What we've been seeing is that the pricing, there was a rejigger in the pricing in June of last year, as I think we're going to speak about the Housing Tenant Protection Act, Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, HSTPA, went into effect. That significantly changed the market and the environment for multifamily property owners in New York City, and the need to have tenant records dating back to the beginning of time, which really made it very challenging for some owners to market their property. And we're seeing that there were significant price discounts that were desired by incoming purchasers. I think with COVID, it was an accelerant to that process, because during that bridge period between July and March, people were trying to figure out what the real price market, what the pricing was for those buildings. And owners couldn't really accept the fact that their buildings weren't as valuable anymore, and they weren't willing to let go of those buildings for those prices. And buyers were throwing out the lowest price possible and hoping that something would, stick to the wall. I think that COVID acted as an accelerant in, combining with HSTPA. And now, while COVID was going on, there was a positive decision for owners, and that was the Regina decision, a series of 4 cases that were decided simultaneously that actually set out the time period, the look back period, and capped the potential liability of overcharge liability. All those factored together, I think, has stabilized pricing, and I think it's brought it down. There's been a decline. But what I've seen is a willingness for owners to acknowledge the fact that the prices have come down, and buyers becoming more realistic about what their potential exposure is, and they can't use the HSTPA as their sword in saying that we have this massive, overwhelming liability anymore, because now we know in a way that it's been capped. So I think that that gap has been closed a little bit, and now deals are going to start to happen at the right price. It will not be at the heights that we saw in the past, but I think right now, if you're looking for properties that you can have some level of stability and certainty as to what your rent roll is and what your future may look like based on the current state of the market, you will see that there'll be activity again.
So, Craig, could you just be specific? The look back period is now, what is it, 4 years? What is the
Correct, 4 years.
4 years. And we were talking before the call started about cap rates and where we think the market might be. Historically, at the top of the market, I think we saw cap rates as low as 3%, maybe even less for prime elevated properties with a lot of upside. I know you're not a broker, but you have some interaction with your clients. What do you see people asking for who are looking for real value, and where do you think the market may settle?
Well, the answer is the people that are looking for the deals are still hoping that they're going to find, or they will magically find, a 5.5 or 6 cap deal in New York City, which is unrealistic. If you ask the brokerage community, or if you ask owners, they'll all say, we're not there yet. And I'm not, we don't believe we'll get there. And if we do, it's because another action has happened that has forced the pricing downward again. Right now, I think that it's probably in the high fours, low fives in spots where you could find deals. But overall, I think in the outer boroughs, you might see higher cap rates, maybe the Bronx, but in Manhattan and in New York City directly, or in Brooklyn, I still think that the cap rates are hovering in the low fives, high fours.
For all of us in the brokerage business, we tend to be optimists. Tomorrow is always better than today. But then sort of off the record, when you have conversations with brokers and owners, does that sort of feel to you like that holds true? Or are people saying to you, well, Craig, I need to say this publicly, but in private, I'm really worried? Or does it feel like we genuinely are at some sort of equilibrium, new equilibrium?
I think that's you are going to see that there are those private conversations, and those conversations are showing that the real concern right now is that there's been a little bit of a fleeing or a movement outside of the city. I could see it in Westchester. I could see it in Long Island. I could see it in Lower Fairfield County. If you want to sell your home right now, or you have the ability to sell your home right now, you are going to see that the pricing is as good as it's been in years in those markets. Reason being is people are leaving the city right now. And I think that that's not dissimilar to post 9/11. Initially, people left the city. And I think that privately, what I've heard is owners' concern over vacancies, not vacancies of their rent stabilized units. In some places, yes, but mostly, obviously, in their free market units. And because of that, and because of the fact that there's still questions as to whether or not schools are opening up, the leasing season and the lease-up season is being slowed and is delayed because people aren't renting those units. You have people that have 2-3 bedroom units that were often apartments that were ideal for young students or early, employment students just out of school, just entering the job market. Those units are, right now struggling because people are unsure as to whether or not they can live with another human being without being socially distanced or without becoming infected. I think that is definitely something that is on the minds of owners. But again, I think that people need to recognize the fact that New York City and New York as a whole is very resilient. Even post 9/11, there was the migration out of the city, and within, I think, a year to 18 months, a lot of those people who thought that they could move to suburbia and be comfortable and happy living in, outside the hustle and the bustle of the city, found themselves moving right back into New York City. So I think that on this short term, there may be that slight decline, but that might be the right time because the opportunity might be right now for some people to jump into the market, to actually capitalize on the fact that there is that concern and find deals to be made.
One last question, Craig. The conversion market, what are you seeing there post TPA? Just in terms of, I know it used to be that you could convert a multifamily into a single family more readily. Obviously, the new constraints and protections for the tenants has made that more complicated. Are you seeing it? What do you see in activity in that front?
Well, I think that the best product for that would be a property that obviously can be developed vacant presently. If someone's going to go into a property with multiple tenants in it, some that may have questionable statutory rights, or some that they're free market but yet may be comfortable in their homes, it may be very challenging to get those people out, and both from a legal sense and just practically speaking. So I think there's definitely been a little bit of a slow in that market, but if you can deliver a vacant property, there's very much a market. In fact, in the height of COVID, I actually saw of deals, town unit buildings that people were actively marketing and actually hopping on because the pricing had finally, like I said, that accelerant between, the market being sort of dormant for a long time and buyers thinking that all of a sudden there might be a deal, and owners finally saying, I got to get rid of my property. I'm just ready. And I've come back to reality and to what the ultimate price is of the property. Finally all merged, and there was a bunch of activity.
Well, great, Craig. We really do appreciate your time. It's been very insightful. Always enjoy spending some time with you, and hopefully we'll be spending more time with you as more deals arise.
Thanks, Craig. We really appreciate it. Rick and I appreciate your time. And I just like for anyone who's watching today to be aware that next week we're actually going to be interviewing Bill Desafee, who's the regional managing director at First Republic Bank. Bill has been a friend of ours for a number of years, and they're lending on a regular basis and seemingly at reasonable rates, but he'll speak to you about that when we reconvene next week. Thank you again so much, Craig, and thank you, Rick.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.